Okay. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. We are really excited and thrilled to welcome Patricia Rogers back today for this life lecture called Body, Brain, and Mental Health. Patricia has presented for us before about craniosacral therapy and her work with the opioid addicted population. And hopefully she's going to give us a little update on that tonight. But this evening, she's going to lead us into how to decrypt the body's path to freedom from mental and physical pain. Now, her qualifications to do this are she is an advanced diplomate level certified craniosacral therapist. She's a graduate of Marshall University. She holds professional licenses in West Virginia, as well as Ohio and Florida. She's an advanced preceptor. She's a teaching assistant for the Upledger Institute. She serves as a primary therapist at intensive therapy programs for integrative intentions, another craniosacral therapy service. She was an invited primary therapist at the Alzheimer's Research Intensive Therapy Program of the Upledger Institute in 2018 and 2019. And she owns Body to Brain Therapy in Charleston, West Virginia. So again, welcome. If you have not muted your microphone at this point, we ask that you please do so to avoid any extraneous noises from outside the recording this evening. This is being recorded, and in a day or two, it will be available to watch again on the West Virginia Wellness Facebook page. So again, thank you for being here this evening, and welcome, Patricia.
Thank you. Okay, so I want to make sure, let's see. Actually, just real quickly before I start, just so I know who I'm talking to and you all know who else involved in the group. So it's not so much just me yakking at you. Kristen, would you mind, and then Janet, to just kind of come on and tell me who you are and where you're tuning in from and what brings you here? I see Janet's. Yeah, there you go, Kristen.
So you just want me to tell you my name and where I'm from?
Well, sure. And you just probably, I think, heard that Jennifer's a music therapist, KJ is a massage therapist up in Wheeling. Maybe just a little bit about what brings you in and what you do.
Well, my name is Janet Wakefield, and I am a registered nurse and a massage therapist and an instructor at Mount State School of Massage. I've been doing that for 22 years. I was a pastry chef in between being a nurse and being a massage therapist. And I just come to this meeting just to gather more information and hear different opinions and different thoughts. And I'm such an info geek that I love to gather knowledge. No matter how much I know there's plenty more to know. So I find this interesting, and I actually love all that you know. So I'm interested in just listening to you tonight. I'm kind of doing double duty. That's why I'm off camera. I'm also doing some work at the same time, but I wanted to catch this meeting.
No problem. Thanks so much for sharing and for jumping on the mic. And you can go ahead and be muted and then join in with the chat, or if you want to just pop in at any time, I'm okay with that if you have questions, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and Kristen? Oh, I can't hear you yet. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yes.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I could just barely hear you guys on there. My name's Kristen Seaman, and I'm from Wheeling, and I know KJ. I'm a massage therapist, but right now I'm doing nursing.
Okay. All right. Thanks for joining. And you too, just chime in with any questions you have through the chat or audibly. Okay, so now I want to share my screen. How do I do that?
You are a co-host, so you should be able to go to share screen at the bottom.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I should have found this sooner. Not part of security or participants chat. It's the big green one in the middle.
Yes.
It's the one that was trying to bite me. Okay. So
There you go.
have we done it? Have I
Yes.
gotten that? Yes? Okay, great. Okay, so thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, KJ, and for humoring me with just, I love group dynamics, and I love knowing who I'm talking with and getting connected. And I thought it would be really nice to just kind of know why we're all joining in. And so again, I'm at Body to Brain Therapy in Charleston, West Virginia. And I'm a forthcoming author, and I do therapy for the body and the brain. And as KJ mentioned, I did, in 2020, I did a talk with West Virginia Wellness on craniosacral therapy and opioid addiction recovery. And then I did kind of an informal talk on anxiety demystified. So I will be doing a brief check-in about the addiction recovery work. And then at the beginning of this talk, I'll be doing a little bit of review of some of the content that I covered more thoroughly in Anxiety Demystified, because I think that's a really good way to introduce the idea of how body and brain impact mental health. And so the topic of today's talk is Body, Brain, and Mental Health. Tap into your body's wisdom to find mental wellness. And so it's worth starting by just acknowledging that in our culture, we have this kind of artificial line drawn in the sand between mental health and physical health. And that can be a bit of a stumbling block for getting to really the core of some issues that can be contributing to mental health. And the type of therapy that I do, which again is called craniosacral therapy, is able to really walk that line and to serve both, as opposed to separating mental health issues and physical health issues as separate entities. The therapy that I do allows for really just managing all of that under one umbrella, so that the interconnectedness that is innately there between the physical and the mental can be addressed simultaneously. So in today's talk, I'll be talking about the body. I'll break it down to 3 different subjects that we'll talk about regarding the body, and then the brain as well, specifically how the physical structure of the brain both go into impacting mental health, and how addressing things through the body and the brain can have positive impacts on mental health. So the first 3 topics we'll talk about are under body. We'll talk about breath, movement, and somatic memory. And so again, breath and movement were both topics that I talked about in the talk that I did in 2021, Anxiety Demystified. And if you're interested in seeing that in more detail, that's on my website at patriciacrogers.com. So breath and movement are vital aspects of managing mental health from the body perspective. And then we'll also talk about somatic memory. So breath. I'm going to start with autonomic regulation. And so I think probably those of you here that are on the call have an idea of what is meant by that. And if you're watching this as a recording, it may sound like a mouthful. Autonomic regulation has to do with the part of the nervous system that regulates the fight or flight versus rest and digest parts of the nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system is what we're talking about, and regulation just means the finding the balance, the nervous system's ability to regulate between those 2 systems, whether you're in a fight or flight response or a rest and digest response. And so this is thought to be an involuntary part of the nervous system, and it governs the way that organs function. It governs the heart rate, the blood pressure, breathing, and digestion. And so what we know about the autonomic nervous system is that as stress response goes up, we have a threat response. And so the heart rate increases, blood pressure increases, breathing increases, and all of those things happen so that we can prepare ourselves physiologically to mount a response to a threat. So for instance, if we are being chased by a tiger, which is, kind of a typical go-to analogy, then you need to be able to get lots of oxygen to the muscles to be able to either probably not fight, hopefully not fight, probably run, but to each his or her own. And so you really need to get the heart rate up, the blood pressure up, and the breath up so that you can get your muscles fully oxygenated so that you can do whatever life-saving measures are required, fight, flight, or freeze to save your life. And then digestion is on the other end of the scale. When you are in a threat response, your digestive function goes down because your body needs all the energy that it can harness to operate the higher heart rate, blood pressure, and breathing. So your digestive function goes down. So I mentioned that the autonomic nervous system is thought to be involuntary, and for the most part, yes, your organs are functioning consistently on a regular basis without you thinking about what they're doing, right? If everything is going normally, then you're not thinking about what your heart is doing or what your lungs are doing. But there is a voluntary hack. And so what I mean by that is that there's a way that we can get the nervous system to switch over from a stress response into rest and digest. And that's through the breath, because we do have voluntary ability to alter our breath. So anytime we choose to, we can take long, slow, deep breaths through the nose, and that can help us to calm the nervous system. It actually turns the function of the nervous system into a different mode of work, and it shifts from what's called, I'm just going to stay with fight or flight versus rest and digest. It shifts you from that stress response of fight or flight into rest and digest. And so that is the voluntary way that we can choose to regulate the nervous system. So, and again, if you want more about that, I go into a good bit more detail about that in that talk that I can list for you later at my website. So movement is another really key part of the way that the body has impact on mental health. And so I don't think that it comes as much of a surprise that, any number of different types of health and wellness providers would encourage exercise, right? That's just kind of part of what is thought to be what we're supposed to be doing for wellness. Well, it's also really vital for mental health. It's not just something that is important for physical health. So, there are pluses and minuses to being human with this big frontal lobe that we have, with all of the executive function and the logic and the reasoning that's possible with a human brain. There's also drawbacks to having a brain that can kind of captivate our whole human experience and get us into this cycle of overthinking. And that's where movement comes in. Movement has the capacity to really help us to get out of cycles of overthinking and back into the physical body. So when I say movement, I'm really, I'm meaning all different kinds of movement are wonderful for us for helping to um, uh, impact mental health in a variety of positive ways. And if you have seen much about me online or know me already, you know that I am big into yoga. And that is absolutely, there's a lot of fabulous things I can say about yoga. And if you are the type of person that is really tired of hearing people talk about how fabulous yoga is, I get it. And I'm okay with that, totally. And I think it's really important to just say that out loud, because yoga is not necessarily the greatest place for people to start with movement, given any variety of different things that may be going on for you individually. One of the things that can be really challenging if you just try yoga and it really doesn't resonate with you is that it could be just really difficult for you to find enough stillness to slow down, to regulate, to help yourself get from that fight or flight into rest and digest. If you have a lot of pent up energy and or emotions that are bubbling under the surface, it may just not feel very good to go into a dimly lit room with a lot of people that are all zen and quiet, and you just feel awkward like a bull in a china shop. And why are all these people acting so relaxed, and I can't begin to relax? And so that's why it can be really helpful to do other more powerful dynamic movements to get that kind of energy out. I definitely advocate that as well. So if you are a body type that, or you're in a mental emotional state where getting to a deeply relaxed state is not something that happens for you readily, and the idea of walking to a yoga studio just feels awkward and weird to you, do what works for you. But movement really is a vital part of getting to improved mental health. And somatic memory. I want to talk a little bit about somatic memory, and so just generally tend to think of as the things that we retrieve as thoughts in our brains. And so I like this little picture of this bookshelf in the brain, and that's what we generally think of as our memory. But that is actually only capacity in the body, and that's what I mean by somatic memory. Somatic comes from the root word soma, meaning body. And so somatic memory is the ability of the tissues of the body to hold on to memories in a way that is similar to, but different from the way that the mind remembers. So what do we mean by somatic memory? Basically, you can store all sorts of information about things that have happened to you in the past within the tissues of the body. And so what happens is, and it often is related to some kind of a negative experience that you've had. If you have an emotion that occurs at the same time as you have a physical injury to the body, the chemicals associated with the emotion that are released into the tissues of the body can actually get encapsulated and stored within the site of that injury. They become encapsulated because it's the body's natural healing tendency to wall off things, to keep them enclosed in a particular area, to keep their negative consequences from kind of spreading out and impacting things negatively in a larger area of the body. And so, it's not uncommon if you have, let's say, for instance, you are in a grief process and you are feeling the emotions associated with grief. And simultaneous with feeling those emotions, you get struck and break your arm. Then it's highly possible that down the road, you've gone through the casting and all the things that were needed and the physical therapy and all the things that were recommended to heal this arm injury, and you still have physical pain. Well, you know, why is that? Why do you have physical pain even though you've done all of these things? And the doctor says that, you know, this is an injury that should have healed. It's not uncommon that with lasting injuries like that, there is an underlying emotional component. There's something that has gotten stored within the tissues of the body that's associated with a destructive emotion. And it's not just with injury. It could also be with illness. This happens when you have an illness. You can also store the chemicals associated with destructive emotions that get encapsulated during an illness, and even just emotional issues like heartache, which is, I probably shouldn't get into it too much, but I've had a bit of one of those this week with the loss of a dear friend. And so it's that is really on my mind this week, just the physical experience of having grief, the physical experience of having a heartbreak or a loss is one that actually is felt in the tissues of the body. And if that is processed through, you know, with all of the different resources that may be helpful to move through those emotions and allow them to flow, then the heart heals. And if on the other hand, there are things that keep you from moving through the grief process, if there's a holding of emotions down, holding things in, a tendency to not allow for them to flow, then that can absolutely end up resulting in different structural issues in the heart itself, or in the tissues around the heart, the bony structure. Any number of different things with the muscle, the nerve can be impacted by a somatic memory of an emotional event. And I'm using the heart here, for instance, just because my dear friend that passed died of a heart attack. But this is what this image of this heart is really just meant to represent any number of different ways that the body can hold on to somatic memories associated with emotional events. So what do I mean by triggered recall? So when we store somatic memory in the tissues of the body, which is, by the way, a totally very natural part of the human experience, it happens regularly. Then it could be any number of things that will cause us to feel the way that we felt at the time when we experienced that event, whatever it was. And so it may be very difficult for you to know what is causing you to feel a certain way. Like, for instance, let's go back to the example that I gave of the person who's experiencing an emotional issue and then gets struck and their arm is broken. So then they may have a variety of different things about their arm that can cause them to feel back into that emotional event that was happening for them at the time the arm was broken. And so it may just seem out of the blue that they have defense mechanisms or coping mechanisms or vices that they turn to, because the body is reminding them of that painful event that's still stored in the body that they haven't processed through. And those emotions haven't yet been allowed to flow. So the good news is that there is therapy for this. The type of therapy that I do has, in its advanced practice, is called somato-emotional release. Somato-emotional meaning body emotion release. And so that is one way of working through somatic memories in the body. There are others. I find yoga to be really beneficial for me in my personal process and helping work through emotional issues at times that have been stored in the body. And there are different kinds of talk therapy that are really body-centered, that are not hands-on therapies, but that are really focused on what is happening in the body as a person is going through an emotional event or being triggered by something. And like somatosensory psychotherapy is one of those. And so there are a number of different ways to get at somatic memories and to bring them to the surface and to allow for the emotions to flow. And when that happens, then the tissues of the body are better able to heal on more on deeper levels. And okay, so now we are to brain. So I wanted to talk about 3 topics on the brain as well. So we'll talk about a little bit, this is just very, very glossed over, structure and function of the brain, brain health, and then brain healing. So this very, very gross overview of brain structure and function. Basically, I just want to kind of bring your awareness in this slide to the idea that there's different parts of the brain that govern different types of behaviors that we have that impact mental health. And I think that so often, again, because of the way that mental health and physical health can be separated in our culture, there is not a lot of emphasis on the physical structure of the brain and the way that it impacts mental health. And I think that can be a bit of a gross oversight if we're trying to manage mental health without looking at the brain and the ways that it functions and the ways that it works. So alarm is housed in the, is governed by a part of this brain that's in the center of the brain. I think, can you see my mouse here? Yeah, okay. So this is really just an artistic picture. It's not meant to be anatomically specific at all. But the alarm center in the amygdala is the part of us that is the instantaneous recognizer of whether there is threat or not. And so in a situation where we feel threat, then that is the part of the brain that's going to go send a signal down to the brainstem to tell the brainstem to switch the nervous system function from rest and digest into fight or flight. So in other words, maybe you're laying on the beach, you're totally relaxed, everything is fine. And then, you drift off to sleep and all of a sudden a wave crashes and your chair is soaking wet and suddenly, bam, you're up and you're moving all your stuff quickly. And that's because the amygdala sensed there was a threat and immediately the autonomic nervous system switched over from telling your lungs and your heart that they can relax, it's time to digest, to, okay, it's time to go. We got to get up, we got to get moving. I mentioned that in particular because this can get overly sensitized and it can get kind of stuck into a place where it is constantly telling the autonomic nervous system that it needs to be in a fight or flight situation. And that can really lead to a lot of different kinds of stress-related illnesses. And it can have a variety of different impacts on mental health. And so the amygdala and the autonomic regulation is like I said, it's closer down the brainstem, closer to kind of where the base of the skull starts going into the spinal column. The spinal cord goes down through there. And so just above where the brain becomes spinal cord is where that happens. Felt sense is our brain's, the way that our brain governs the way that we experience our feelings in our body. Felt sense is the ability basically to feel what our body feels like, to be aware of our body, to know where it is in space, but also know what it feels like, and to just be able to have a sense of, this is what is going on in my body right now. This is how I feel. This is not the same for everyone, and it has it can become quite underdeveloped, especially depending on what it was like for us growing up, our sense of safety, our sense of bonding to other adults that are relaxed. If we don't have those kinds of things, then the part of the brain that governs the felt sense doesn't necessarily develop that really good understanding of, this is what I feel like in my body right now. And if we don't have a sense of what we feel like in our body right now, it can make it pretty difficult for us to navigate a lot of different things. Because remember that rat race, not the best way, the hamster wheel that we can get on of overthinking in the brain, that can really kind of be out of balance if we don't have a good sense of felt sense. The speech center of the brain, obviously it governs speech, but it's important to note when we're talking about mental health, because the speech center is when traumatic things happen, when big events happen that cause us to have fear of life or limb, and those are a natural part of the human experience, right? We all have times when we are in danger and feel threatened. That causes the speech center of the brain to go offline. When we get into a place where we are really just operating in survival mode, the speech center is not operational in a functional way. And one of the reasons that is so important to talk about in a conversation about mental health is because so often when we experience really difficult things in our culture, our go-to is, well, let's sit down and talk about it. Well, it turns out that doesn't really work that well, because the speech center isn't operational. If you just know basics of how brain function works, the speech center isn't operational while that life or death experience is happening. Or even just, if it doesn't have to be life or death, it can just be a perceived threat to life or limb. And so all of that experience that we're having in the body of doing what it takes to save our lives is actually just really in the body instead of the brain, instead of the speech center. And so I'm just realizing speech is spelled wrong, sorry about that. Trying to understand things through talking through them may not be the best way to go. Actually, getting the body into a relaxed situation where you're able to get into autonomic regulation, able to get into rest and digest mode, that's going to be far more functional for helping to manage an event that was a perceived threat to life or limb than just sitting and talking. Sense of self is a part of there's a part of the brain that governs sense of self, and that can be impacted when a person grows up in an environment where they don't have good autonomic regulation. If they don't have bonding to a parent who has an ability to stay deeply relaxed, and they're not able to find safety in their body regularly, then they can develop a poor sense of self. And it's actually shown that the part of the brain that is involved in us understanding our sense of self is not particularly well developed in people who grow up and have a difficult time regulating their nervous system. Impulse control is another thing that can really impact mental health. And the reward center of the brain is involved in impulse control as well. Reward center of the brain is that's the part that has to do with the behaviors that we develop in order to seek out yummy foods for the nutrition that we need. And so if we have good impulse control, then we are regularly seeking out nutritious foods to help support our vitality. And if we don't, any number of different things can cause us to have a kind of a rewiring of the reward center, which can serve to help improve brain chemistry, which will help us feel better because of the way that dopamine functions in the brain in the reward center. And so it's quite common for people that have difficulty with autonomic regulation, difficulty with relaxation, to have dysfunction of the reward center of the brain. And that is what leads to addiction. Because if the reward center of the brain is not working function to keep us just eating nutritious foods, if it starts getting to be functioning to help us manage anxiety, then we can develop any number of behaviors to seek out things, whatever they are, delicious foods. It could be drugs or shopping or sex or whatever it is that will improve the brain chemistry by increasing dopamine. And so you can see how very readily that has a negative impact on mental health. I'm going to skip flexibility because I feel like that might be a typo. Attention. Attention is the is the ability for us to stay on task, on target and functioning, and it helps a lot with executive function. And attention can be really altered if there is a shift or a change in a type of cells in the brain called oligodendrocytes. Those are structures that help at the synapses between the axons to send nervous signals. But it also kind of creates a grid and a structure. And that structure can get negatively altered. And if the structure of those oligodendrocytes is not fully functioning to help the nerves signal to each other, then it can cause attention issues. Attention, I don't want to talk about specific diagnoses here, but it can be very difficult to focus if you don't have proper function of those type of cells. And then there's the timekeeper of the brain. The timekeeper of the brain also gets impacted when we are in experiences that we perceive as threat to life or limb. It can be very difficult for us to recognize that that event that happened is something that happened in the past. And that is quite commonly observed in, for example, people who war vets that have PTSD, and a car backfires and they hit the ground because of a conditioned response to being at war and hearing a bomb. That timekeeper part of the brain is altered in a lot of different instances, not just with war vets, of course, but anyone who has a significant experience of something that's a threat to life or limb can develop a difficult time with knowing where they are in time, knowing that something has happened to them in the past and that it's not happening to them in the present. And so this can actually bleed into then lifestyle difficulties with being on time, or with overcompensating for not being on time by always being early. So it's not uncommon actually to see this with people who have a history of trauma. They may have difficulty with managing time, either by being late all the time or being obsessively early as a defense strategy. So brain health. Brain health is not something that I want to talk about in too much detail, but I think it is important to just explain that, you know, in our culture, we don't necessarily always think about brain health. We think about different kinds of things about our physical health. And I don't know that we talk enough about brain health. And I don't know that people know enough about the fact that they can be empowered to improve their brain health. And so I am not going to get into nutrition in this talk or into exercise in the ways specifically that those impact brain health, but I'm just mentioning it here because I think it's valuable to recognize you may want to kind of explore this on your own. Daniel Amen is a particular doctor that writes about brain health, a lot of stuff about nutrition and how it impacts the brain. He also talks about a variety of different mental health issues that are impacted by the brain and brain function. Brain healing. So this is a big part of what I do in my therapy practice. There are a variety of different hands-on techniques in the therapy world and in the osteopathic world that can have some impact on brain function. The type of therapy that I do, craniosacral therapy, can have pretty profound impacts on brain function. And so it may be a little bit difficult to imagine how we can touch the brain. But I'll just briefly describe. It has all to do with you know, really knowing your anatomy and understanding that a very light touch and deep presence can be valuable in transmitting mechanical impulses from the external to the internal. And so if you just imagine pulling on the ears just very, very gently. And then you imagine that you know the structure behind the skin tissues into the skull. And if you know the skull anatomy, and then you know about the connective tissue and how the connective tissue inside the skull travels, and then you know how that connective tissue gets into and shifts into brain tissue, how they connect, then you can imagine perhaps that if you pull very lightly on the ear over a long period of time with focus and intention, you can transmit a gentle pressure from the external deep into the internal brain. And that is the work that I do day in and day out, having a positive impact on the tissues of the brain. And so, you know, I talked about a number of different parts of the brain that impact mental health. And so just knowing the anatomy and knowing the functions of all of those different parts of the brain, you can then work with fluid flow, you can work with the different temperature changes, and all sorts of things that we can feel about what's happening within the tissues and enhance those. One of the things that we do in my therapy is work with the cerebrospinal fluid to enhance the flow of that fluid. And that's the fluid that bathes the brain and it detoxes it. So as that fluid flows through the tissues of the brain, it takes out harmful waste products. And so craniosacral therapy, that's one of the major things that it does for the brain, is to just help it to detoxify and to flush out harmful products. So that brings us to the end of what I wanted to talk about with body and brain and how they impact mental health. And so I did want to just, as KJ had asked, do a quick just catch up on the work that I did with opioid recovery under a grant. And so there is one case in particular that I presented in 2020 that I would love to give you an update on. So this is a client that had a very complex medical history. And so this is a kind of a wide array of different things that she was working to overcome. She grew up with extensive trauma, and that had lasting impacts on, virtually all of the systems of her body, and not the least of which was, PTSD diagnosis. And so all of those things led to well, not all of these, her history of trauma and the way that the brain was working to compensate for what she was going through resulted in addiction. And so when she came to me, she was 10 months sober. And she had not been sober in her adult life. She had started drinking at age 12, she was in a car accident at age 17, and she was prescribed opioids at that time. And so she was an opioid addict and a benzo addict, and had been 10 months sober when I met her. And had a wide array of complications. And some of these results I covered the last time I reported on her. She had anxiety relief and pain management. Those were two really huge ones for her. And she was able to release her victim identity and release ownership of her pain. She was able to start to find her sense of purpose. And she went through a certified recovery coach program that was really valuable in helping her to find her way forward after having, all of her adulthood was taken up with addiction. And so as she was becoming sober, she was looking for a way to, find meaning as an adult in her new life. And so to that end, she, worked on getting her driver's license reinstated, and she was finding that other people were reaching out to her, asking her for help in their recovery. And one of the most exciting things that shifted for her is that she was able to actually get out of a really tough housing situation into a new living situation where she is safe and warm. And I am proud to say that I am quite proud of her. Proud to say that she is still sober. She's not under my care at this point. Unfortunately, the grant program funding ended, and so I'll just put this shameless plug in now. If any of you guys have any ideas about a foot in the door for future grant work similar to this, I have seen that it's been really powerful. And so I'm happy to entertain any conversations on that topic for sure. It was really, really rewarding work. I continue to have private clients now in addiction recovery, a variety of them. That's kind of one of the things that I specialize in. It's just I see a lot of people with a history of trauma in my office, and that just very commonly goes hand in hand with addiction. So thank you so much for joining me, talking about body and brain and the way that they impact mental health. I would love to open up for any questions. I will just share with you that if you want to, you can use this little image. You just hold your phone up to it and it will take you straight to my Instagram page. I post on there a couple of times a week snippets of just kind of tips for how to address a variety of different things associated with the body and mental health and the ways that the body and the brain interact with each other, kind of working to bridge that gap, that line in the sand that's been drawn between physical health and mental health. And so here is a picture of my business card. And so tell me, what if anything strikes you about anything that I've talked about, or any questions any of you have?
Thank you, Patricia. Very interesting. I think Beth has a question. So go ahead, Beth.
Yeah, hi, Patricia.
Hey,
I'm sorry I joined a bit late. I had some technical difficulties.
I'm glad you were able to make it.
Thank you. I was interested, if you haven't covered it, what started your interest in the field of the brain-body work that you do?
Sure. I didn't cover it on this talk. I'm happy to. I'm happy to share. I actually have a history of PTSD. I grew up with trauma from early childhood sexual abuse. And it took me into my late 20s before I started to have any understanding of how to become a normal, functional person in the world. And it was craniosacral therapy that really began to help me turn a corner and find my footing. And then with that, I later developed a pretty serious yoga practice. And so it's been the interconnectedness between craniosacral therapy and yoga that really kind of has created the therapist that I am today, and the person that I am in my approach to healing. But you know, upload craniosacral therapy, I just don't know. I've been working with therapy with other people who have experienced trauma since 2009 now. And I just don't know anything that does a better job at meeting people right where they are at, who have a history of PTSD or trauma. And I just think it's so valuable to be able to help people out of what some may think of as a kind of a life affliction, but it doesn't have to be. It just doesn't have to be. And so, I think it's kind of common when we find something that alters our lives so completely, we want to share it forward. And that's certainly where I'm at.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing who you are and what you do.
Oh, absolutely. It's my pleasure.
Thank you. Kristen, do you have a question or comment for Patricia?
What's a typical session with you, like when you we first arrived?
What's a typical session like? Yeah, if I'm understanding what you're asking, just what's a session like? So if okay, so in your first session, you would come in and we would talk for a bit so that I understand a little bit about what's brought you there and what you hope to be different, or and just what's happening for you at that given moment. And then there's a treatment table, just like a massage table, that the client will generally lie down on, usually if they feel safe and comfortable. And then I do a very quick assessment where I just touch on different places of the body from head to toe to feel into the system to get an idea of how everything is working together. And that quick assessment then gives me an opportunity, it gives me an idea of where I want to start with hand placement. And then I choose a place and I settle in with my hands on the body with a very, very light touch. If you imagine the weight of a nickel resting on the back of your hand, it's about 5 grams, far, far less than the weight of your hand. That's the amount of pressure I would use to touch wherever I've chosen. We'll say just on the arm for argument's sake, because I can touch that here and now in the camera. And so then the body can experience any number of different kinds of things in response to craniosacral touch. It may invoke a pretty quick, deep relaxation. That's not uncommon. It may cause emotional things to percolate up to the surface right away. There may be awareness of a lot of different physical sensations. There may be I check in with the client and they are just in a hamster wheel of thoughts in their head and not really engaged in what's happening in their body at all. And so whatever that is for the person, that's kind of where we start. That's the beginning of the process, and it unfolds from there. And craniosacral therapy is built on the idea that the body knows what is needed for healing. It has innate wisdom. And so this therapeutic touch really just facilitates what the body already knows is needed for healing. And it provides the extra, it's like being an observer for the inner wisdom, helps the inner wisdom to unravel whatever is needed for healing. Does that answer your question, or does that maybe cause you to have more questions?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I know that each individual person will be different based on their history, their background, the traumas they've suffered, how much victimhood they're carrying, how much of, their trauma they still hold on to. But do you have kind of a general time frame when you expect to begin to see significant improvement with a client?
That's a great question. And it's, of course, a hard one to answer. But generally, when I talk to someone, I can get an idea of what they're up against. I can get an idea of what they're looking for, what they're hoping to get out of therapy. And that can kind of help me to gauge what I can tell them they might expect after the first few sessions. Commonly, actually in my office, I offer right now, anyway, a package of 4 sessions, and I have other packages as well. But if people are not quite sure how this is going to impact them, I often tell them, try 4. And at that point, you're going to have a good sense of the cause and effect relationship between the therapy you experience here on the table and how that impacts your life as you leave. It can be a little bit difficult at first to recognize that cause and effect relationship. But after you've experienced a handful of sessions, you have a better sense of that. And then quite commonly, after people come and they start getting therapeutic wins and start recognizing that, then their therapeutic goals change because, this is a really covers a wide gamut of things that a person might want to be different in their lives. From the physical to the emotional to behaviors. And so oftentimes people come in with one thing that they want to address, and they end up kind of really going on in their personal growth process in a variety of different directions. That's not really an answer at all, is it?
No, it is. It's fine because
Okay.
you're saying you're starting out looking at a time frame of about 4 sessions. And are those, how frequently do you have those sessions? Are those, 2 or 3 times a week? Are they once a week, once a month? How far apart would you space those 4 sessions typically?
Sure. I will back up and just say that it's very common for people to come in after their first session and say, I felt so much better. This has changed. This is different. I can't believe this was related to this. And this is it. So that is common, but it's not always that people have awareness. So I give that buffer of 4 sessions for people that it takes, if they need to kind of develop their learning curve on their awareness of what's happening for them. So having said that, frequency also really depends on what a person's goals are for treatment and really kind of how acute their issue is. If somebody is really like not functional and not able to, just do the daily things of life and is desperate, then I would love to see them twice a week for a couple of weeks and then reassess frequency. If someone is really busy with their life and getting on with a lot of things, and they have this one thing that they really want to be different, but they also have these other things they're prioritizing, I'm happy to try once a week and see how that goes and check in a couple of weeks and see if the frequency needs changed. Once a month sessions is kind of a hard place to start unless a person already has a really deep understanding of and work through their personal growth process already, because it can just be difficult to kind of help with that learning curve of the cause and effect relationship between what's going on the table and what's changing in life. And it just makes it harder to kind of remember what happened from a month ago, and it makes it harder to keep the therapeutic momentum going if it feels like you're kind of starting from scratch a month later. Certainly, it's quite common for people to come in with an acute issue that gets much better, and then they would like to have some ongoing tune-ups, and once a month is a good frequency for that kind of thing. That can be really great.
Yeah, it helps to maintain the continuity a lot better, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And on this final slide that you have put up, you list that you're offering 3-day immersions.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that experience, if you would, please. That sounds
I
intriguing.
would love to. Yes, I've been having increasing numbers of people coming in from out of state or from across the state to come in and stay in Charleston for a 3-day immersion. And so that involves getting my 100% attention day in and day out as they go through a really nice solid chunk of the therapeutic process. And so this is a great fit for people that don't live in Charleston. It's also good for people that really, that are local, but want to just really kind of take the bull by the horns and get on the other side of something that's really been troublesome for them. And so, it's all about kind of putting whatever else is going on aside and devoting all of your energy and your awareness into your therapeutic process for these 3 days. And you spend all morning and all afternoon on the table receiving therapy and getting the kind of the full package, the full gamut of physical, emotional, mental, behavioral shifts and changes that your therapy process needs, and then going back in the evening to wherever you're staying and getting whatever it is that you need for nutrition or exercise or a hot bath or a walk in the woods to help integrate those things so that you can do whatever it is that you want to do differently as you go back to your regular life. And I'm getting really great feedback about this program from participants that have traveled in for it. And it has an opportunity to really kind of change your life trajectory. When you just do a big chunk in this 3 days. And I do feel like it's more of a the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. You could do the same number of hours once a week over several weeks, and it would have, I feel like just compacting this into 3 days can really just make a really, really nice impact.
I'm sure it can. Yeah, those on this call who know me know that I, like you, I'm very passionate about craniosacral therapy, and I am absolutely in awe of the marvelous, nearly miraculous things that we have seen it do. And really appreciate you sharing your stories here. Really appreciate hearing about the one opioid, addicted client that you've gotten such a wonderful outcome with. Appreciate you updating us on that. That's terrific. Does anybody else have any other questions or comments for Patricia? All right.
I want to thank you all so much for joining.
Thank you again for sharing with us. Really been fascinating.
Yeah, I love this group.
The time and the effort and energy that you have put into preparing this for us this evening. And it's something that I probably will end up going back and watching again just for the fun of it. So
yeah. I love that. I love that. Well, thank you ladies so much.
Thank you. And you have a wonderful evening. Thank you all for joining in. Great to see you all on here tonight. We appreciate it. Stay tuned for next month's Life Lecture. We will have Barbara Calcagni talking about thermography. And if you're not familiar with that, you definitely want to tune in. Thermography is a way of viewing the body that's non-invasive and is actually proven more effective for finding breast cancer and other forms of cancers and inflammation in the body than mammograms. And it doesn't hurt. So we hope you'll tune in. If you are not already on our email list to receive our notices, please reach out to us at West Virginia Wellness on Facebook or West VA Wellness Inc. at gmail.com. That's INC for Inc. for Incorporated. So West VA Wellness INC at gmail.com to request to be added to our email list. And we'll make sure that you get one of the flyers with a link to all of our upcoming programs. Thank you again for joining in, everybody. Nice to see you all. Have a great evening.
Thanks,
Thank
Patricia.
you. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.